So from time to time in a role as an Azure administrator, you might have to write some code in order to do some automations to save yourself some time on repetitive tasks. And that might lead you to wonder, for the AZ-104 exam, is there any programming on the AZ-104 test? Well, the good answer is that there's not any programming in the sense of coding, .NET, Java, any of the API calls. This is not a developer test, not even a DevOps test, but there is some scripting that you're going to need to know. So scripting is the form of PowerShell or CLI. Now, in terms of going to access Azure resources, the most common way that we're going to do that in this course is through the Azure portal. And you might even find through your role, through your job, that you might find yourself using the portal most of all as well, and that's perfectly fine. But there is a couple of other methods that you can access the Azure resources running on your account. And there's a few even beyond this, beyond .NET SDK, and there's a REST API. But I'm going to talk specifically about the two scripting languages of PowerShell and Bash CLI. The other types of what I would consider to be programming, which is really just being able to read a JSON, which is part of ARM templates and is also returned when we do some CLI commands. We're going to see JSON as the results. And so I don't really consider that programming, but being able to read the output of JSON is probably a good skill to practice for this job as well. So we might have a fundamental question in terms of you just want to skip scripting, learning how to do scripting of PowerShell or CLI. This seems like a waste of time. Well, it isn't really. In terms of your job, you might want to learn some scripting just so you can do some stuff in an automated manner. So when it comes to managing your Azure resources, you may need to create virtual machines, modify virtual machines, check the status of things, etc. And having to remember those commands in your head could be a little burden. Having to remember a multiple-step process does introduce the possibility of error. So if you've got a 15-step process to create a virtual machine, then you may get some steps backwards and it's going to take a longer time. So there's a lot of good arguments for introducing some automation, some scripts into your repertoire in terms of having, stuff that you use on a daily basis that helps you manage a complicated Azure environment. Another good use for scripts is that you can check them into some type of source control or central repository. And that way other people can share in your scripts and you can actually track the changes over time. So if you were using one particular set of scripts all of last year to create a set of virtual machines, and then you make a little tweak to it because of a new feature or because of an enhancement, then you can see when that change happened in your source control repository. Again, the source control should always contain the latest version of scripts as well. So there's no hunting around to see who has a more updated version of the script based on the date and time of the modification of the file. Scripts do reduce errors, and so if you are frequently doing something, just being able to run a little command line utility is going to be a big benefit to you, as opposed to, again, having to remember all of the tasks. Now, this is little talked about, but I also find scripts to be a form of documentation. And so when you are asking, hey, how do we go and do this? Looking at the way that the script does it is probably the most up-to-date answer to that question. If you have scripts that you use on a regular basis or your team uses on a regular basis, then you don't need to write a flowery language. You don't need to have Microsoft Word files that are describing your process. You can see the process. You can see the variables. You can see the order of operations. Code is a form of documentation if you can read the code. Now, like I said, Azure Portal is the most frequent way that we're going to access the Microsoft Azure in this course, and maybe even in your job. The URL for that, if you don't know, is portal.azure.com. Now, when it comes to the exam, the AZ-104 exam, it is also worth asking, how will Microsoft test me on my Azure knowledge? So there has been, over the years, what's called performance-based labs. And so sometimes within the Microsoft exam, Microsoft will provide you a real working Azure environment for you to go in and ask you to perform a series of tasks. And so you're just going to follow exactly what they say. If they say, go and create a virtual network and give the network this name and create the subnets and have the subnets named this with the following address ranges, then you're going to follow those tasks specifically. Now, the good news about the performance-based labs is that it doesn't matter exactly where you click and how long it takes you to create this task. You can, maybe you don't know exactly where the SSL setting is, and so you have to click a couple of things to find it. I find that to be a much more forgiving method. So you can use the portal, you can use the PowerShell command line, you can use CLI command line, and as long as you do the task, the virtual network with this name and this address range is created, then you're going to get the credit for that. I should point out that performance labs are not on every exam. I've heard they're bringing them back. Sometimes they go away if they're having challenges with it. So performance-based labs are a hit and a miss whether you're going to see it or not. The second way that they'll test you is sometimes you'll find code is part of a question. So you'll go and you'll look at a question and it'll say, which of the following lines of code completes this script? And you'll see 10 lines of a script with one line missing, and you're going to have to look at the A, B, C, and D answers and pick which is the line that would work to complete what the script is trying to do. So even though you don't have to write code, you do have to read code and comprehend what it's doing and understand what's missing. Microsoft, only about half of the exam is multiple choice questions. The other half are going to be more innovative styles. And one of the styles that Microsoft loves is this drag and drop style, where you would have some items on the left of the screen and you're going to drag them with your mouse onto the right of the screen. And it may be the parameter name of a script. So a script is trying to do something and some parameter name is missing, and you're going to pick the parameter name from the left and drag it over to the right. So that's the kind of question you might see as well. Now, Microsoft does have PowerShell and Azure Bash CLI environments within their portal, and we'll talk about this in a second, but you can see that's greater than sign and underscore right on the Azure portal, and that's going to lead you to a command line utility within your browser. So you click this, you have to create a storage account the first time you do it, but once you've done that, you'll be taken into either a Bash command line or a PowerShell command line based on your choice, and you can switch between them. So here is the example of a PowerShell command line. Good, interesting thing about PowerShell command line is it does accept Bash CLI commands. So this PowerShell command line is bilingual. As you can see in the PowerShell commands, you can actually enter PowerShell commands such as ps version table, .ps version, and you'll get, so this is a up-to-date, fairly up-to-date version of PowerShell, including the Azure components for PowerShell. And once again, that is on the greater than and underscore within the Azure portal, the Azure Cloud Shell. So let's just sum up. This has been a longer video, and I appreciate your patience. Let's just sum up my advice in terms of studying for PowerShell. Again, you do not actually get to choose between different scripting languages, and so it is in your best interest to know a little bit of PowerShell, a little bit of CLI. I do have a video coming up talking about how to you learn the commands without having to really study them, and so you don't get to choose a scripting language. So that's one thing to know. I do recommend that you do get lots of hands-on practice. And so as we go through this course, I'm going to put some lots of demos in this course for the portal and the occasional PowerShell and CLI demo as well. Absolutely, I recommend that you have your own Azure account, whether it's the free account or your company account, and go ahead and get a lot of practice inside the portal, because that's really learn by doing is one of the strongest forms of learning. When you are taking the exam, let's say the exam gives you 120 minutes to do about 50 or more or less questions. If your exam contains performance labs, and not all of them do, but if it does, then one of the things that I hear people say is they wish they had more time. And so they could spend 100 of their 120 minutes doing the multiple choice and the regular testing section, and then they're left with only half an hour to do the performance labs. And really have to hope that things go perfectly, that the portal is running fast that day, that your resources are being created in a very timely manner. As you know, and you will find out going through the Azure portal, sometimes you go and you create a resource that in the past takes 1 or 2 minutes, and just you catch it at the wrong time, and it takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So leave yourself time for the labs, because you would hate to run out of time because Azure is slow that day, and that does happen. So in this lesson, we're going to demystify the command line tools in Azure. Now, I know what you're thinking. Memorizing hundreds of commands sounds like a nightmare. But here's the secret. You don't have to. Microsoft has built in a really predictable naming system for both the CLI and PowerShell. Honestly, once you spot the pattern, you can guess 90% of the commands that you'll ever need. I want to show you this in action. I've got my terminal open here, the Azure Cloud Shell, and I'm starting with the CLI, which is the Bash command line. We'll talk about PowerShell in a second. The pattern here is super simple. The commands always start with the letters AZ followed by a space, and then the service name. So in this case, I'll choose VM, and finally a verb, what you want to do. So watch this. I want to see all of my virtual machines, so I type AZ VM list and hit enter. And there they are in JSON format. So did you see that pattern? I'll do that again. We do AZ VM list, and that will show the VMs. Now, what if I want to create a VM? Well, the command, as you might guess, is AZ VM create, followed by all of the required parameters. If you want to delete the VM, well, you can guess. So it's incredibly consistent across not only VMs, web apps, and other types of resources. So there is a hierarchy of commands here. The middle word is what changes, and then the verb. Now, sometimes the service name is a bit longer, so VM is the simple one. But what if we want to show virtual networks? Well, virtual networks actually is a sub-command of networks. So I'm going to say AZ network VNet list. So you'll see it's 2 words for the service name. So network is the broad category, and VNet is the specific item. but it still ends in that word list. Now, if we switch over to PowerShell, I'm going to say switch. So it's going to start up a whole new session. It's not the same as the CLI session. It's now PowerShell session. One interesting thing I should mention is that PowerShell in the Cloud Shell supports CLI commands. So I can say azvmlist in PowerShell and it would work, but that's not a PowerShell command. Another interesting thing is now that I'm logged in, I have to set my session, my context to the subscription that's relevant to where my VM is. And so I'm going to say set AZ context just to get to the right subscription. Okay, I'm going to say clear. All right, so the equivalent to AZ VM list is get hyphen AZ VM. So you'll notice that the verb comes first with a hyphen AZ and then the object of the verb. So instead of AZ VM list, it's get hyphen AZ VM. And now I can see the virtual machine that is running. Now PowerShell doesn't have the create command, it has the new command. So if I was to want to create a new virtual machine, the command is new hyphen AZ VM. And if I was to want to remove it, it's remove AZ VM. So you'll see, even though the words are a bit different, the syntax is fairly consistent. So the pattern is verb, which is like get or new, AZ, and then the now. So get AZ key vault will be an example. Or get AZ virtual network. So when you're in the exam, or even if you're just working in the real world and you forget a command, don't panic. Just think about the pattern. If you need to retrieve something, you start with get hyphen AZ. If you need to make something, it's new hyphen AZ. It's that simple. So go try this on your own. Go start up the Cloud Shell in the Azure portal. You can type a convenient helper is called get command. And if you want to look at anything that has AZVM in it, you can just put asterisks around it and say AZVM, and you can see all the list of commands and the version that has been installed for that. So get command is your helper for PowerShell. And it's that simple. All right, so let's talk about the various command line utilities that we're going to see on this exam and in this course. Now, you may be very aware of PowerShell. PowerShell is a command line that is usually included with Windows. This is not the Windows terminal or the Windows command line. This is specifically a tool called PowerShell. Now, some versions of Windows come with a thing called Windows PowerShell. If you go to your Windows startup menu and start typing PowerShell, maybe you're going to see Windows PowerShell. That's an older version of PowerShell. We do not want to be using Windows PowerShell. What we want is a version that is called PowerShell 7. Again, most recent versions of Windows 10 and 11, for instance, do come with PowerShell. But go check to see what version of PowerShell that you have. PowerShell is also a cross-platform tool. So we're not just talking about Windows here. We're also talking about Linux and OS X, of course. So PowerShell 7, if you're going to use PowerShell as your command line tool, is a cross-platform thing. Now, there is also an environment for people used to the Unix and Linux standard called CLI. This is also sometimes called Bash, although I understand Bash itself is its own language. But CLI is an Azure tool for Linux system, but it's also cross-platform. If you want to use the CLI app on a Windows system, that's available. You can go and download it. Again, Bash CLI is native to these Linux operating systems and OS X, but it's also available for Windows. So beyond the PowerShell and CLI, we do need to have Azure modules installed inside of these tools to make it so that we can use the Azure command line with our Azure environments. Now, if you want to avoid installing anything, or maybe you're not even allowed to install anything on your local machine, there is the Azure Cloud Shell. So you can either get to it with its own URL, or if you go to the Azure portal, there's this greater than sign with a little underscore in the top bar of the Azure portal. And if you click on that, you get the Azure Cloud Shell. It's a terminal inside your browser window. You can run Azure commands. This is an example of the get-azvm commandlet that is going to return to you all of your running virtual machines. But this is an example of an Azure command inside of the Cloud Shell. Now, if you prefer to use a Bash, you can also use this 3, 2, 1. Now, one of the great things about PowerShell is that it supports the CLI commands. So within the Cloud Shell, if you type azvmlist, that is a CLI command, but we're still in PowerShell and it still works. So PowerShell within the Cloud Shell is cross-platform in terms of language. So let's talk specifically about PowerShell itself. Long time ago, many moons ago, there used to be this module called Azure RM. And if you've been around since then and you're using Azure RM, well, that's just totally been deprecated by now. You should be using the AZ module. Just to be clear, you cannot have both Azure RM and AZ running on the same system within the same version of PowerShell. And so you have to upgrade, you have to uninstall Azure RM and get up to the AZ module. Now, you can have PowerShell, different versions of PowerShell running on your system. So if you do need both for whatever reason, you can have one of your PowerShells having the Azure RM and one of your PowerShells having AZ. There's really no point in this year and beyond. There's really no point having Azure RM. So you should have it. So your assignment at this point is to make sure you have, if you're going to use PowerShell as your command line, make sure you have the latest version of PowerShell and the latest AZ module. In the next video, I will go through, I'm going to demo to you how to download PowerShell, the latest version, and how to install the AZ module. You may have had an older version of PowerShell, like PowerShell 6, that was cross-platform, called PowerShell Core. Again, I would refer that you use PowerShell 7. So that is the latest one. They keep coming up with new versions. So I put 7.x just because whatever's the latest version of PowerShell you should be using. Once you've got the latest version of PowerShell, then you're going to be installing the AZ module, and you say install -module, and that's going to, you say /name or -name AZ. That's going to install the AZ module. If you already have the AZ module, there's an update module that you can run that will update it to the latest version. Once you've got the PowerShell installed and you've got the latest AZ module, you do need to connect your version of PowerShell to your Azure account, and that is a login type process. That is connect-AZ account. We'll demo that. So if you want this to be running local, you could use the PowerShell, like I said, or the CLI. Again, Cloud Shell is a perfectly fine way to do stuff. If you've got scripting to do, you could do it with the Cloud Shell, or you can run it local. So if you want to run stuff local, or you have the ability, I say your assignment is to get the latest version of PowerShell. We're going to talk about that in the next video. I do have a link to the website for that coming up. And then you are also going to install the latest AZ module as well. We do have to run PowerShell in administrator mode in order to make these changes, and I'll show you how to do that. Right-click, PowerShell, run as administrator, and then install the AZ module or update it as I mentioned. So this is a good point in the course to pause the video, pause the course, go download the latest, and install it. All right, so as I said in the last video, we're going to be running to run PowerShell 7 in administrator mode. So on Windows 11 here, I've typed the word PowerShell and I'm brought up to the right version. And when I start PowerShell, I can see the word administrator in the status bar at the top, and I can see it says PowerShell 7.54. And so I searched the web for PowerShell 7, and I like this GitHub link, so that's what I'm going to choose. Now, I don't necessarily want to run the pre-release version, so on the PowerShell releases tab, I'm going to scroll down, and the latest version, actually, if I say releases/latest, is 7.54. So I confirmed that I do have the latest release running on my local. Now, you can see that there are versions to download for Linux, ARM, and other chips. We have OS X, Windows, both 64-bit, and the old x86. If I was to reinstall this, I would choose the Windows 64 MSI because it's the simplest installer for me. Of course, you can choose any of these packages as they're appropriate to you. You can also choose to download the source code and package it yourself if that's what you want. Let's download that and install it to get the latest if you don't have it. So now that we have the latest version of PowerShell installed, the next thing to check is the AZ module. I'm using the get-installed module commandlet with the -name AZ in order to see what I have, and I have version 14.5 running on this system. So doing a quick check of the PowerShell gallery shows me that the latest version of the AZ module is now 15.1.0. Do keep in mind that they do release these pretty much monthly, so by the time you watch this, there could be a more recent version. But I am going to want to install the most latest version of this on my local. Now, we could probably just simply say install -module -name AZ, and that would be enough, but we also wanted to allow it to overwrite it if it already exists, which it does not. But I'm going to have these allow clobber and -force commands to add to it. So what it's going to do is download the latest 15.1 version of AZ from the repository, and we're going to watch it as it installs. Now, it does download it a module at a time, and it does it in alphabetical order, so we can sort of guess how far along. It also has this progress bar to give us an idea, so we'll let that run. So now when I run the get installed module commandlet, I'll see both versions, 14.5 and 15.1 in my case. Remember, I said in the last video that they can run side by side. The way that it works is if you run some type of commandlet, it's going to do it in the latest version is the one that it's going to select. And you can specify specific versions, but if you don't specify the version, it'll pick the latest one, and that's fine too. So last example is we're going to choose this Connect AZ account. And this is going to let us log in to Azure. And it's going to pop up with a login option, and we're going to be able to choose whichever, or log in with an account if we haven't logged in before. Now, it actually does offer me all of the subscriptions that I have available, so I can pick one of them, and then I'm logged in with the subscription and the tenant that I'm requiring. So let's just test it. I'm going to say clear. So I'm going to try a command like get AZ resource group. You'll see there's an autocomplete. If I hit the right arrow, it will accept the suggestion and hit enter. And I can see all of the resource groups I have on this subscription. So we have a working local version of PowerShell with the AZ module. Now, for most of you watching this, you may only have a single subscription, in which case you don't really have to worry about choosing which subscription to use in a command line context. But in this video, I want to talk about switching between different subscriptions if you have more than one. Now, I'm in PowerShell on my local machine, and I've already connected to Azure. As you can see, it's warning me that it contains more than one active subscription. It's chosen one by default, and if I want to change it, I have to use this set AZ context. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to have to use a get AZ subscription command, and that's going to list me all of my existing subscriptions. So I'll do that. And it does come back with 3 options for me. So I want to use this set AZ context. In the past, I've been able to, create a context variable and use the get subscription with the right ID. We can actually just pass in the ID of the one that we want to use. So I can copy this ID for this Azure sponsorship subscription and just pass it into set AZ context -subscription and pass in the ID of the subscription and hit enter. And from that point, I will be working against this tenant. And if I list resources, create resources, modify things, it will be with this context. Pretty simple. One of the first concepts we're going to have to deal with in this course is the concept of identity and identity management. Now, Microsoft recently made a huge switch in the branding of their identity products, which used to be called Azure Active Directory and has now been renamed to Entra ID. So basically, you're going to find a mixture in the internet in general, perhaps even in this course, where I mention Azure AD, and what you should be thinking about is it's now called Entra ID. So I'm still getting used to thinking about this product as Entra because I've been calling it Azure AD for 7+ years now. So the concept of identity within Azure and identity management is sort of one of the central tenets of security. Good security policy means having good identity management. The identity is what you're going to hand out to your users, their ID and password, or maybe you're going to create multi-factor authentication, so there's additional elements beyond password. But basically, you're going to need a system to manage the back end of people's identities and to secure that. And so in Microsoft Azure, the native platform is called Entra. Now, Entra is a derivative of one of the most successful identity management products in the world of Microsoft Active Directory. So Active Directory, not to be confused now with Entra, is the on-premises identity management. It is handling networks, objects, users, groups on-premises. There's no cloud involved in Microsoft Active Directory. And so what Microsoft did was they extended that concept into the cloud with Azure Active Directory and now with Entra. And so Entra is a cloud-native version of handling users, groups, and identity in the cloud. Now, there is a lot of similarities between Microsoft Active Directory and now Entra. Think of it as having a lot of overlap, but they are not replaceable, interchangeable products. You cannot just get rid of your company's on-premises AD and turn everything into Entra accounts without a lot of effort in terms of doing that, making your whole business into a hybrid environment, etc. All right, so they don't have overlapping features and functions. There's some overlapping features and functions, but there's some things that on-premises AD does that cloud AD doesn't. So for instance, there's some protocols that work not over the internet, so they're not compatible with HTTP or TCP. That would be Kerberos or LDAP and things like that, where those are not compatible features over the broad internet. And so that's why we had to use internet compatible methods. And so that is where you get protocols like OAuth and SAML. And so in this section and the videos that follow, we're going to get into talking about Entra, how you are provided one when you set up a brand new account, what you can do with it in terms of managing users and groups, how applications, custom applications that you develop can use Entra to manage the identity of their users and do authentication through that, as well as third-party products such as Dropbox and OneDrive that you can validate through Entra to give people access to certain files and folders in third-party products. So Entra is a huge topic, and there's a lot of moving parts. It's going to be very difficult for me to give you a full overview of Entra in a single video. And so in this video and the video that follows, we're going to be talking about all the different ways that we can do identity and access management in the cloud using Entra. let's talk about the different pricing options for Microsoft Entra. Now, Microsoft Entra does have a free tier. So when you do create a brand new Microsoft Azure account, you'll be given a tenant, and that tenant is going to be free at first. It is included with Microsoft Cloud subscriptions such as Azure, Microsoft 365, and others. And so if we scroll down here to the bottom, we can see the free edition included with the subscription of a commercial online service such as Azure, Dynamics 365, Intune, Power Platform, and others in countries where it's available. All right, so you can get a free tier with Microsoft Entra, and that's how you're going to basically start. Now, what Microsoft does with their free tier is they basically let you create a lot of users and groups, so they are not limiting you in terms of the number of users you can create, things like that. It's not a very limited plan, but what they do is restrict you when it comes to some of those advanced features. And so, for instance, if you're running on the free tier, then there is no SLA for Entra. So if you are relying on this as a production service, then you don't have any contractual thing to fall back on. Now, this makes sense because the SLA is a financial agreement that Microsoft will refund you part of your monthly fees if they fail to meet certain service levels. So when it's free, of course, there's no refund, but there is no guarantee in terms of quality of service. When it comes to some of these advanced features, like if we look at logging and reporting, there's going to be advanced security reports that are not included in the free tier. When it comes to maybe the biggest one is multi-factor authentication. This used to be not included, and over the years, Microsoft has done this so that administrators are included, and now it is included on the free tier. But you'll see some of these features like conditional access and conditional access evaluation, things like that are not part of the free tier. So I'm going to scroll back up here. So the free tier is quite useful to a lot of people. It just doesn't have an SLA, and then you don't get some of these AI or other advanced features. The next up, you have what's called a P1 subscription. That is $6 a month per user. Now, you are going to assign which users are part of your subscription. So, for instance, you may have 1,000 users, but maybe you only need 100 of them to have some of these advanced features. And so you can select which users get the P1 at $6 and which ones remain as free users. And finally, P2 is the higher tier level of that for $9 a month. We'll talk about what are included in P1 and P2 in a second. Now, there is this additional Microsoft ID governance level that wasn't necessarily available before, but basically it's an advanced set of identity governance capabilities. You have to be an existing P1 or P2 user, and special pricing is available for P2. You don't have to maybe pay the $7 a month if you're already paying $9 a month. So let's scroll down here, and we got the free tier on the left, and we've got the P1 and P2 here. We can see for most of the stuff, authentication, federation, which is using external identity providers like your business